podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
Hello everyone, I'm Chris Wynn and welcome to How Are the Podcast from Roker Report. And yes, we're still basking in the events from Saturday because it's good fun, and why shouldn't we? So today I have someone who is not just the soundtrack of the day itself, but in fact the whole season. It is, of course, BBC Newcastle's Nick Barnes. Hello, Nick.
Hello.
Hello, yes. What a weekend, eh? I mean, I suppose for a commentator, surely it doesn't get much better than that, does it, Nick?
No, it doesn't. I mean, they don't happen very often, so I suppose you want to try and, like everybody, you want to try and take it in, remember it, embrace it. And it's one of those strange weekends when you don't know what's going to happen. You hope something, go your way, and then afterwards it's complete sort of still processing it, still taking it in. And I several times I've had conversations with people about the worst case scenario and what it would have been like if they'd lost the game at the weekend and how horrible that would have been. And I chatted to Simon Pride at work actually the other day about it, how at the end of the game I asked him, did you see the lads from Radio Sheffield? No, didn't see a sign of them. And it's that horrible. You just think, they probably just packed up, quickly gone and done whatever interviews they have to do and go, that horrible, horrible sinking feeling that we had in 2019 when they lost to Charlton. The other side of it was ours. We then were on an absolute high after the game and never wanting the day to end in one strange way, because it was just mind blowing what happened.
Yeah, I mean it's huge when you think about it, Nick. Really, like this, what is essentially a shootout. It's between two sides, and like you said, obviously it impacts your night, it impacts your weekend, it impacts your summer, but also this game. As you've just, and I only thought about it just when you said that, because I hadn't actually contemplated that since the final whistle, that there was a chance that we got beat in this game, but it does dictate where the club goes potentially the next 5-10 years.
Very much so. The landscape, it was a sort of sliding doors moment in so many ways this summer. They could go one of two ways. You could go Premier League, and what's that mean financially? What's that mean for the club over the next 3 or 4 years, if not, as you say, longer? Or they're back in the Championship, and do you start again? Do you go through a cycle of 2 or 3 years trying to rebuild, get more young players through in the fashion that they've got this group of players through, and would this next group of players do the same thing and achieve what this group has done? Or would we still be 4 or 5 years down the line, still be trying to get into the Premier League? So it was a massive game, massive weekend with very, very deep implications, whichever road you ended up going down. And as it happens, they're going to go down that Premier League road, and who knows where that will take them. And hopefully it will be managed right, and it will be handled correctly, and they do all the right things, and they will be able to sustain Premier League football, or at the very least sustain an up and down scenario, which is probably, if we're realistic, probably the most likely scenario. But who knows? This group has certainly defied all the odds so far and surprised everybody. Can they do it again?
Yeah. Send a bit of a shiver down my spine actually thinking there was a chance we might have actually lost this game. But just going into the weekend itself, Nick, I mean, did you get to sample anything on Friday evening, or was it an early night for you in terms of soaking up the atmosphere?
I sampled a desolate studio in Broadcasting House with Benno when we did Total Sport on the empty second floor, virtually empty second floor, in a lonely studio, 2 hours locked away in the back of Broadcasting House, and then we went for an Indian. Rock and roll.
It sounds like it. And I was going to say, actually, I was thinking before we started recording, actually, that Sunderland had one Wembley appearance between 1992, two Wembley appearances, between 1992 and 2019, and then suddenly it's almost become a second home. We've been there so often lately. I mean, how was this time kind of turning up to Wembley? Was it kind of usual seats, and all of this?
Well, it certainly felt. Actually, it one thing about having been there so often in the last few years, is it did feel very familiar, and that actually calms a few nerves. I think that takes that particular anxiety away from the day. The first time we went in 2014 for the League Cup final, then we didn't know what to expect. We'd not been to the new Wembley. We didn't know where the media entrance was. We didn't know where the press room was. We didn't know where the press box was. There were endless corridors. We ended up in the top of the West Stand and couldn't work out how we got there, and so on. And it was all new and a bit discombobulating. But then, of course, going back in 2019, it felt much more familiar. Then we went back again, and then we went back again. And so this time round, strangely, I had this strange feeling when I got off the tube at Wembley Park this time round. I don't know if it was just me being early in the morning. It was 9:30. And so there weren't huge amounts of people around. But Wembley Way seemed to have shortened. And because the last time we were there for Wickham, it seemed to be a really long walk up to the stadium. This time round, it just seemed somehow it had been curtailed. And that's clearly just a psychological thing, because it hasn't been and exactly the same as it was 3 years ago. But it felt shorter, which was weird. But then you walk up to the stadium. It sort of took my time. I think I arrived at 9:30. I didn't go into the stadium until 11 o'clock. But it was straightforward then. You know the way in. You know the stairs up to the press room, and from straight out the press room into the press box, down the steps to the pitch side, and so everything then is really familiar. And as I say, that is in a way is a little bit of a comfort blanket.
Yeah. And you mentioned obviously recording on the Friday night. You mentioned getting there quite early. I mean, I don't know if you got a chance to kind of speak to people, but before the game, especially maybe the national media who were in attendance as well, because I don't know if you were kind of talking about the narrative that seemed to be kind of pushed before the game, that Sunderland actually seemed like big underdogs, and Sheffield United seemed like these huge favourites before kickoff.
I didn't. Strange enough, I mean, usually at these games, you bump into the likes of Henry Winter and national journalists like Henry. I didn't see anybody this time round, and I'd read a bit here and there about Sunderland being the underdogs because of the points differential, at the end of the season. But the press room itself, and I didn't spend a lot of time in the press room this time round. Consequently, I apparently missed Romeo Beckham was in there, and I don't know why. There's no rhyme nor reason, but apparently he was in there, I'm told. And I sort of breezed through, and I briefly saw that Clive Tildesley was in there. A quick hello with Sam Matterface and a few others that I know from sort of broadcast media, but I didn't really see many national newspaper journalists. And I was then literally rushing around because we were trying to get hold of, I'm sure you've heard of Big Davey, the Sunderland fan who comes on to Total Sport, who's sadly been diagnosed with a stage 4 brain tumour. And to cut a long story short, the club got him to Wembley on Saturday. So I was trying to track him down, I was trying to get to him, bumped into Tony Mowbray, and I was everywhere I was going, I was stopping and seeing people I knew and talking, having a chat. And then as I was coming back from seeing Big Davey, bumped into Lee Johnson. It was like, and then all of a sudden I knew I was on air, and I had no time to take in who wasn't there, if you like, apart from the immediate colleagues from Radio Sheffield, and I saw Phil and James from the Echo, and Scott and Don from the Northern Echo. But again, we were like passing ships in the night. Everyone's focused on their sort of build up and what they were doing. So we didn't really any of us stop to have any lengthy conversations.
Yeah, and then we finally got to kick off in the game. Atmosphere was unbelievable, and Sunderland were cranking it up. But literally opening seconds, ball goes wide, and they cross the ball in. And Kiefer Moore, fantastic header actually. I mean, if he could have decided where he wanted the ball to go, that's where he would have picked to put the ball low down in the corner. Unbelievable save from Anthony Patterson, and Luke O'Nien got caught up in the aftermath as well with his shoulder. But the signs were ominous in that first minute, weren't they?
Well, they were, and you're right. Patterson's save was outstanding. I mean, we had the benefit of monitors in the press box, and I watched it being replayed a few times. And then the first time I saw it replayed, I thought, it looks even, sometimes that a replay doesn't look as good as when it was live. This time it was the other way around. The replay looked even better because I realised just how low he'd had to get, how far he'd had to stretch, and that ball was heading for the bottom corner. I give Kiefer Moore his due. I thought he actually had a good game, bar, of course, he made the pass that led to Tommy Watson scoring. But, take that out. I can see why over the last few seasons, Sunderland fans have called for the club to try and sign Moore, because when he's in that sort of form, he is a handful. There's no question. He doesn't get, a huge amount of goals, but crumbs, he can hold the ball up. He's a size. He takes a lot to monitor in a game. And I did think he played. And as you say, that first, he could have been on the score sheet within a minute or two, but for Patterson. And then, of course, the 09 incident, the fates of that. I've heard a couple of conversations since about Mepham playing and Mepham being able to marshal Kiefer Moore, if you like, and would 09 have been able to do that so effectively? We'll never know. We won't find out. But I know there's been this debate through the season about should it be Mepham and Ballard playing as the two centre backs, but it's very difficult to argue one way or the other because 09 at times has been been outstanding at the back, and the number of goal line clearances and the number of blocks, the number of last minute challenges he's made, is passing out of defence. It's hard to try and pull the threads out of that particular debate. But fate had it that Mepham came in, and I thought Mepham had an excellent game and he did really, really well. So that again, one of those things, one of those fates on the day that probably favoured Sunderland.
Yeah. Well, it is ridiculous as we go through it, because I've gone through it so many times in my head this game now that it is just a series of moments. And this one in the first minute, because again, you would talk about the save, but at first glance, I've said it on a previous podcast that I actually thought there was potentially the ball went over the line because it went behind him. It had that look about it where he had to claw it out from behind him. But if you think this moment, we could have in the first minute gone behind and lost Luke O'Nien in the first minute. And okay, in the end, we only had 50% of that and lost Luke O'Nien. But again, it's one of these moments that will come through in the game that just ended up being so huge that and one we had to kind of come back from, really.
Well, if he had scored, it would have been devastating, understandably, emotionally, because of conceding in the first minute at Wembley in a massive game like that. I think our reaction in the press box during the commentary would have been is there's still 89 minutes to go. Let's not get carried away with Sheffield United scoring early. Just make sure you don't concede a second, I think would have been our mantra at that point.
Yeah.
Which is ironic because Tyrese Campbell goes from a Sunderland corner, they score through Campbell, and then Burrows buries the second one. And we think, your instantaneous reaction at that point was, whoa, 2-0, this is game over, because I can't see Sunderland coming back from that. And then all the drama around VAR. So within the first, 25 minutes, we'd had enough drama to keep us going in a normal chain of events for an afternoon.
Well, that you're right. And that first goal, because as he said, it was a bit kind of ironic that actually it was the first time we'd actually threatened the Sheffield United goal when Mayenda picked the ball up on halfway, turned, and then ran the full length of the pitch with the ball and managed to win a corner for us. And it was the first time we'd ventured out, really, and got out of our half almost. But this kind of brought into almost what was happening, before that point, because Sunderland looked, and Mepham was one of them, standing on the edge of the area and in conversations, looking really confused about where he was supposed to be and what we were supposed to be doing, what was supposed to be happening, where the corner was going to go. And we tried a short corner where Chris Rigg ran from the back post. It was clearly choreographed from the training ground. And from that, what was it, 20, 30 seconds later, the ball's in the back of the net at the other end? I
think it was even less than that. Did I read not somewhere it's 12 seconds or something between the moment that Gus Hamer got the ball and the ball found its way in the net? Because the speed, look, we spoke in the build-up about Gustavo Hamer and what a threat he is and what a threat he could be. And there we are. That was the proof in the game. When he got that moment in isolation, he took it. And the speed with which he broke and over the halfway line and swept down the other side. And the pass for Tyrese Campbell, I mean, it was almost in Sheffield United's respect, the perfect goal. I mean, Sunderland, the corner threw me because I didn't expect a short corner, but B, a short corner as they played it along the goal line, and it just seemed to be something. Clearly, there was something wrong with it, and Sheffield United, they capitalised on that. All credit to them for doing so. But it's all well and good, all these practicing set pieces on the training ground. But if you practice but if you don't get it right, that's what can go wrong. But credit for them for trying it. But they were punished for it in the circumstances. And when they went one up, I mean, your heart sinks. Clearly, it's one of those moments, and you think, oh, is it going to be our afternoon? Are we going to come back? Are we going to get back in the game? And they weren't playing particularly well. And you're thinking, they're in the ascendancy here, Sheffield United. This could be, this could conceivably be all over by half time.
Yeah.
But I mean, you keep going, don't you? Obviously, you keep going because you haven't got any choice, but hoping that something turns in your favour, which as it happens, it did.
Yeah, well, that's it, because, 5 minutes later, Mayenda had actually half a chance where he had a header in front of goal, which, you could argue he maybe could have done better with. And then 5 minutes after that, you do think it's all over. That the ball hits that back of the net, and I just kind of slumped, and I just genuinely thought that's all over. And there's a couple of things to this. Obviously, there was a corner that was cleared, volleyed back in, straight into the back of the net. I mean, for a commentator who doesn't need to deal with VAR, I mean, did you just call the goal and not even think anything of it at that point?
I think at the time I did. I mean, I initially thought it was Sidney Peck who scored, and then realised it was Burrows by that stage, because there was 20, 30 seconds of celebration from Sheffield United, and I'm trying to pick out the goal scorer rather than watching any monitor or anything else. I'm literally, my focus was on this group of Sheffield United players down near the touchline, and the player that was buried underneath them all, trying to work out who it was. And then it finally, Burrows came out of the bundle of players. So I suddenly realised it was Burrows and not Peck. And then I'm looking at the monitor, and there's a question. Then suddenly someone, either Marco or Benno, mentioned, well, will this go to VAR? Almost certainly will, because they always do. And then it came up on the screen that it was going to VAR. And we were in that process then, and slowly it started to develop that this goal was possibly offside. We started to see the angles on the monitor. And then we finally saw an angle from behind the goal. And then that led, I'm not sure about the timeline of this at all, but I think then we saw that the referee was having to go across to the monitor. And that seemed to take an age. And I couldn't actually even see the monitor on the far side. It was on the opposite side of the dugouts. So I couldn't actually see it pick it out amongst the crowd. But then the referee disappeared over there, and it seemed to take an age across at the monitor while we're watching all the replays. But the replays did seem to suggest, there's a player right in front of Patterson who is the offside player. Now, I guess the argument here is, was that particular player interfering with play? Well, it remains subjective, doesn't it? But there was another player stood just behind him, and if you're looking from behind the goal to the left of him, and he was clearly obscuring Patterson's view of the strike of the ball. It's directly in Patterson's eye lines, directly in line with Burrows. So he couldn't have seen the ball being struck because there was a Sheffield United player standing in the way. Now, he wasn't offside. So this is where it is still subjective. And I know I've read a couple of match reports, and both, I think 2 or 3 of them all said the subjective referee's decision. And ultimately, it probably was. But I have to think, you have to think the player standing in front of Patterson in an offside position, I would strongly suggest that is interfering with play. So, because it means that Patterson's got half an eye on what he's doing, and surely if that is the case, then you're involved in the play.
Yeah. Was that a new thing? Because I'm not sure I've ever seen a subjective offside where a referee has to go over and have a look. They either draw the lines or they don't.
Well, this is interesting because I'm only judging this by what I've read, and they didn't draw any lines on the the monitors that we saw, and it was the referee's decision. And it didn't appear to be a decision made by Stockley Park. It seemed to be the referee's. It seemed to be his decision and his alone on the afternoon. So I can own, my assumption is that that's what everyone's assumption in the press box that wrote up the match report, was that it was Chris Kavanagh's decision, and thereby probably a subjective decision and not one made by the VAR officials at Stockley Park. I might be wrong. I mean, someone listening to this might know more than I do. Than all I'm judging it by is the memory of what happened on Saturday afternoon and what I've read subsequently. But yeah, I ultimately, do I care? No. But I'm, because it swung the game in Sunderland's favour. If that goal had been allowed, then I would have had very, very severe doubts as to whether Sunderland could have gone on to win it. Because I think even if they'd scored one, even if they'd scored two, I think Sheffield United may well have scored a third, and they would certainly have been in the ascendancy themselves. So I think, that was the turning point in the game.
Yeah. Well, there was a lot of talk before the game that it was two teams who didn't really like having possession of the football very much. And certainly after Sheffield United scored that first goal, it made it a lot easier for them to allow us to just have the ball and for them to sit in and try and hit us on the break, which I think is what we wanted to do to them. But they just let us have the ball. But even in possession, do you think in that first half, because it seemed to be nerves more than anything else, that almost stopped us from even doing the simple 5-10 yard passes correctly?
Yeah, I don't think. I mean, looking back, in the game, Marco was critical of. Well, Benno was critical of Rig on the right wing. Marco was sort of defending it to a degree. Benno wanted Roberts on in that role. Dan Neil was not having a great game, and basically, I think in that respect, when you've got one or two, maybe three players not their best against a team like Sheffield United, who are physically strong as well, you could see they were going to struggle to get hold of the ball in midfield and to make any sort of inroads against Sheffield United. And that sort of seemed to be the way it was panning out. They just seemed flat in the centre. They didn't get much ball. And when they did get the ball, they didn't know how to use it. They didn't know how to exploit any space they did try and find. I mean, Mayenda to me is the strongest player in that respect, because you alluded to it earlier. He's prepared to take players on and run at the defence, whereas the rest of the team just seemed to be still trying to find a way through by passing it and playing it square, trying to play it out to the wings, and it wasn't really happening. Mundle didn't get into the game, which I was a bit disappointed about, because I thought Mundle could have been. Well, we said beforehand Mundle could be one of the key players, but he didn't really get a grip of the game. And that's not necessarily his fault. That's, you've got to commend Chowdhury and Brewster and Sheffield United for the way that they came out of the blocks, if you like, and they made their intentions clear early on in terms of getting on the ball and surrounding Sunderland players. Whenever a Sunderland player was on the ball, suddenly there were three Sheffield United players, closed them down very quickly and suffocated them, basically.
Yep. Yeah. Well, I mean, what was the feeling around the press room at half time? Because, you could almost argue that Sheffield United, as you've just touched on there, kind of bullied Sunderland in that first half.
I think there was a feeling, I was sort of stayed out in the press box. I had a conversation with one of the Talk Sport commentators, actually, and he was saying they've got to make a change. Sunderland got to make a change. And I said, well, that echoes what Marco and Benno have been saying. He also added that, I think TalkSport, he said, we've had numerous texts from football fans, not necessarily fans of Sunderland or Sheffield United, praying that Sheffield United don't win. I thought was quite interesting. He said basically, the neutral fans wanted Sunderland to go up. But the consensus seemed to be that a change needed to be made. I think there's always this, in those situations, you always think, well, a change needs to be made, but in your heart of hearts, it's not going to be made at half time unless there's an injury. And I think, when the two teams came out for the second half and no changes were being made, it didn't entirely surprise me. But I'm pleased then that they did make the changes. And Roberts, I think predominantly the change for taking off Rig, bless him, for Roberts was the catalyst in that respect.
Well, yeah, because I mean, we came out for the second half. We looked a slightly different team, but we still weren't creating anything, and we still didn't really look dangerous. And then, as I've got it, it was about 68 minutes, which I think things kind of conspired. These kind of moments started to happen because around 68 minutes, it was when there was a long ball over the top, and Dennis Serkin allowed the ball to bounce a couple of times.
Yeah.
And Patterson came to the rescue again with his legs. And not only Patterson, but Ballard followed that up with a really good tackle to stop the follow-up going into the back of the net. And it seemed like that was the start of things where Sunderland fans then cranked it up and it started to turn, because it was only 3 minutes later that we had the two subs. As you said, Neil came off, Watson came on, and I think the Roberts was just a few minutes before that, but Mundell came on for Isidore as well a couple of minutes after that. So we made those changes, but it was a hugely brave thing to do a couple of minutes. Well, I suppose the catalyst might have been that chance, thinking, right, well, that's another lifeline we've used. We need to make a change. But to bring Dan Neil off, yes, okay, he wasn't having the best of games, but you know, you sometimes think he can get into a game and put his foot on the ball when you need to. But maybe you're talking about Roberts was the catalyst, but dropping Lefane to actually get him on the ball made a difference as well.
Yeah. I mean, let's not underestimate Patterson's role in the final. It's been slightly lost in the narrative, if you like, because the narrative has become the Mayenda and Tommy Watson goals and the VAR incident. But that save from Brooks was astonishing. You know, that's two big critical saves Patterson made in the game. One, when he's barely come out of the dressing room and he's made a fantastic reaction save. And then secondly, his concentration levels absolutely 100% to deny Sheffield United that chance. And I think, well, you know, it probably was the catalyst for Reggie Stabreeze and the coaches to say, right, we've got to go for this. We've got to try and get this by the scruff of the neck. Because I suspect the feeling was that if we allow Sheffield United now to get any sort of dominance, if they take that chance and it ignites their sort of zeal at the end of the game, we've got to extinguish that fire. So I can see that that's probably why the changes were made. And I think, you know, as it turns out, you're watching those players. Then I think Jack Robinson was tiring badly. Mahodžić was clearly tiring. And I think, you know, the Reggie Stabreeze and the staff made the right decision, because Roberts coming on when he did, and look, there's a sort of backstory to this with Roberts' calf injury, which is the reason he didn't start the game.
Yeah.
So he when he came on, he drifted into the middle, as you say. Lefay dropped deeper. Suddenly they were making passes through Robinson and Mahodžić, and they couldn't deal with that. They were tired. They didn't want to be turned. They weren't quick enough to close the gaps. And Sunderland were clearly in the ascendancy then. And they were stretching Sheffield United. They were harrying them. And they were actually a real handful for Sheffield United at that point.
Yeah. Yeah, like you said, it was the goal came only 5 minutes after those subs. And like you said, you know, I felt it was the first time we played through the lines really quickly and left, you know, took some Sheffield United players out of the game. And it started with Lefay having that ball deep, and then Roberts coming centrally to add another body in the middle. So it was nice to see as well, Roberts not just hugging the touchline, getting involved in the centre.
But what a pass. I mean, what a fantastic pass.
Inch perfect, and Mayenda's first touch. But it was a really strange goal, because he took that first touch, and I think even he was surprised when he looked up to realise he was so close to the goal, with so much of the goal to aim at.
I did. I watched the replays of that goal and thinking, when it went through, I'm thinking, I actually was, the first time I saw it, I was thinking, is this the goal? Is this the goal? Because it looks like he should have smashed it the first time, but then wanted to put it on his right foot when he got into the penalty area. Then I realised this is the goal. He's taken a second. He realised he's still got an opportunity to get it on his right foot, and the power which he got through. I mean, I know over the last season or so, when Tony Mowbray was at the club, he talked about Mayenda's explosive kick, and that was encapsulated in that goal. I mean, he took the roof off the net. It was extraordinary power. You know, he didn't have to break stride because of Patrick's pass and the explosive finish. I mean, stunning, absolutely stunning.
Yeah, and talking about the mental side of the game, because and I mean it's an obvious thing that goals change games, but for so long Sheffield United seemed to be almost patting us on the head and so comfortable in the game. For a game to completely flip like it did, and at this point, they only seemed like one side who was going to win it, because Sunderland just seemed to have all this energy. You know, you saw of our players that they looked that extra yard faster, they were winning the tackles. And Sheffield United, you could almost see everything just drain out of them. And it's strange when you watch a game, you can actually see this happen in front of you.
Well, I suppose the prime example of that was Hume's tackle on Brereton Diaz. I mean, what a tackle. I mean, it's absolutely, when you watch it back, I mean, it was pure, it's class. He got the ball, he took the man. I mean, what he said about it is hilarious as well. But, I mean, Brereton Diaz is literally a broken man on the touchline. And that moment was Sunderland all over in that final 15 minutes, 20 minutes. They just grabbed the game, and by hook or by crook, they were not going to throw it away. And Hume, that moment, probably, it's going to be it's going to be consumed, of course, because of Watson's finish and Mayenda and Patterson's saves and everything. But if you want in isolation, a moment in a game, that Hume tackle is everything that Sunderland's been about this season. The determination, that driven desire to get this job done and never to give up. It was unbelievable.
Yeah. And I've already said, because, I mean, it was a proper old-fashioned fullbacks challenge, a proper challenge. Clive
all credit to the referee. All credit to the referee, because there are plenty of referees would have blown straight away and given Hume a yellow card.
Well, Clive Tilsley did touch that. You know, he did think that he might not get away with that in the Premier League, but a perfect challenge, as you said. But I've said this previously, that this moment is huge because it extended injury time out. Then in the extended injury time, there's a clash of heads. They go down to 10 men. And then, but again, we're talking about these moments, these sliding door moments. Patrick Roberts tries one of his trademarks runs in from the wing. And, you know, we're thinking we might have a chance here. And he loses the ball. And Sheffield United are on the break in the 95th minute. And then the ball comes into Kiefer Moore's feet. And if he plays that pass right, I think it's like 3 against 3 at the back. Mm-hmm. And he gets it all wrong, goes to Watson's feet, and the rest is history. But you go back to when Watson came on, and we said we actually had to remind ourselves before the game about Watson potentially being on the bench and writing this story. But it ended up happening. You saw it playing out. As soon as Watson picked up the ball, you almost felt it. You thought, this is actually happening. Watson could produce something here. It's his moment. But instead of trying to ping it into the top corner or 40 yards over the bar like maybe Max Power did all those years ago, just to side-foot it and pass it into the inch that he had in that bottom corner was unbelievable.
I don't know how many times I've watched the goal. The one that view from behind, you know, from the Sheffield United end, I've watched it over and over and over again. Still convinced that Cooper's going fingertips to it, or it's going to come off the inside of the post and come out. And it is a remarkable, mature piece of football from Tommy Watson to keep his head in that situation and produce, as you know, people were saying, caressing the ball into the net. I mean, I did listen back to the commentary earlier because the substitutions, because I was convinced we'd said something about what would it be like if Tommy came on and scored the winner. And we did say, well, what a story it would be if Tommy Watson had a part to play at the end in taking Sunderland up, which is you say that in the moment, not believing for one moment that's what's gonna happen, and then that story unfolds and just absolutely remarkable. And in the aftermath, I said in the commentary, I've said afterwards as well, there's a minority of people who needed to really give their head a shake this season after the treatment they gave Tommy Watson. Tommy, didn't didn't hide away from that afterwards. There's many footballers who would have brushed it aside and said nothing, but I'm pleased he did say how it had affected him, and it hadn't been easy for him, hadn't been easy for his family. I was on the tube with a member of his family going back into London on Saturday night after the game. We had a 20-minute conversation about Tommy and everything he's been through, and what people don't realise is what his commitment off the pitch over the last few months and before, as a Sunderland player, has been second to none. He pounds the streets on his own. He does so much work away from the academy to build up his physique. And I was told, have a look at his legs, have a look how big his thighs are now, and his general physique compared to a few months ago. He spends that much time on him, religiously trying to become a better footballer. Him and his family are Sunderland through and through. And Tommy was at pains to point out how much that meant to him afterwards. He's a Sunderland fan. You've got to put to one side the whole Brighton thing. They're professional footballers. These things have got to be boxed off sometimes. And Tommy Watson, not for 1 minute did he not want to play well at Bristol City, or not play well in any other game, and not be involved. His heart was 100% in achieving what he achieved on Saturday.
Yeah. And he wanted to show his physique off, didn't he? His shirt came off.
And why not?
he got his yellow card, but I don't think he minded at that point. But you mentioned about the neutrals, but because Sunderland were just full of stories, to win this playoffs. You're talking about, the big one, Tommy Watson. You're talking about Patterson, who's come under fire this season and made the saves when he needed to. You talk about Sheffield United's side being 68 million, Sunderland's 8 million. Chris Rigg, the youngest player to ever play in a second-tier playoff final, third youngest ever in a playoff final. And then you've got the youngest ever team to play in a second-tier playoff final. And then you've got the academy players scoring winning goals in the last 3 times at Wembley. You've got the Dan Neil picture as well, the League Cup final. And he picked up the trophy. I mean, just full of stories. It just seemed to be, written that we were going to do this.
Yeah, I think the story, it's the story of a season, if you like. And I think, to a certain extent, you can go back to the League One days as well. Talking to Patrick Roberts afterwards, and he was saying, look where we were, look where this club was when I signed for it. Look at the journey we've been on. Look how, and Job afterwards, that extraordinary interview with Sky, where he was very, very critical of Sky pundits and how they'd written Sunderland off as being, too young to achieve anything. They've all been on this journey, and they, Job may be 19 now, and Riggs 17, but they've all played how many games? They've played in one of the toughest divisions in the world. They've come through so much over the last 2 years. That 6th place finish with Tony Mowbray, that completely sort of circus of a season last season, and finishing close to relegation, and then starting off this season with a win at Cardiff and never looking back. And they've had some ups and downs through the season, unquestionably, but they won at Middlesbrough. They were written off against Coventry and come back with that incredible Dan Ballard goal in the semi-final. I mean, there are countless other moments. Eliza Mayenda's goal at Bristol City. There are moments through the season when these young players they've just outshone everything and proved the critics wrong. And I think in those last few weeks of the season, when they were losing games, they lost those 5 games. The players were adamant that everything would be fine. Reggie was absolutely fine. Everything would be okay, and we just had to trust them. We just had to trust them, and look what happened.
Yeah. So straight after the final whistle, I mean, obviously you were trying to probably keep, everyone else was losing their heads around you when you were probably trying to keep your composure. But did you have to go down and try and get some words from people? I mean,
I did eventually. Yeah, I did eventually go down. We obviously had to wait for all the. I mean, the press box is in a ridiculous position where you can't see the presentation on the royal balcony because it's out of eye line, and so you're watching it on a monitor, which just seems absurd. Really, you spend that many millions on a football stadium, and you can't actually see the royal box where majority of big games end in people walking up to the Royal Box to get a medal, and you can't see it. So that is a bit absurd. But that aside, we had to wait for all that to take place and eventually for all the players to leave the pitch and head down into the tunnel. So I made my way then down into the tunnel. But the players came out from the dressing room then in full kit still to make their way up to see all their families who were in the Great Hall, a couple of flights up in the main stand. I mean, what was lovely for me, and this is probably one of those, those moments that make finals, that make seasons for you. The players, one by one, as they came through, when they saw me, made a beeline for me and gave me a hug or a big shake of hands, and it was just this outpouring of emotion, if you like. And it was very moving. It was very moving because that then club staff and even Mark, the team bus driver, came down, gave me a big hug. It was just very much because I think everyone realised, I think, that we've all been on this journey from League One right through, and as everyone described, the wilderness years, if you like, and it was incredible. And we had to wait a while then, and then I finally got taken in to see Reggie, who was the epitome of calm, just never changes. And then I came back out and Pat Roberts came down, and I had a nice 3 or 4 minutes with Pat Roberts. But it was, and I'd spoken to Tommy briefly as well, and Eliza. But it was a perfect end, if you like, a perfect end to the afternoon. It was, it was absorbing, it was emotional, it was moving, and it sort of bookended the season, if you like. I mean, it was a strange season because when we went to Cardiff, the first game of the season, we travelled down on the Friday, Benno and I, and we couldn't get a hotel in Cardiff because of Billy Joel playing that night. So, as it happens, I discovered that the Celtic Manor was within BBC rates, which was bizarre. So I booked Celtic Manor, and we'd pull up to this massive golf resort and this massive hotel, and we walk into this sort of grandeur of the reception at the Celtic Manor, thinking something's gone wrong here. We're going to be told that you're not here actually. So when we got to reception, the girl there goes, "Oh well, there's been a change." I thought, "Oh, here we go. This is it." Back in the car, and she said, "Oh, you've been upgraded." And I said, "Are you upgraded?" And she said, "Yes, you've been upgraded." I said, "Why?" She said, "Oh, I don't know why." She just said, "You've been upgraded." I said, "Well, okay, right." But it turns out we've been upgraded to the presidential suite on the top floor, and we were both pinching ourselves. And I now look at this season, and it's been bookended by the beginning of the season staying in the presidential suite, and the end of the season in the tunnel at Wembley, and it's been a remarkable in between, if you like. So it'll live long in the memory. This.
Yeah. So how were your celebrations after the game? Then were you able to?
I was
get out
quite,
there?
actually. I was. I eventually got back. Benno and I tried to make our way down Wembley Way, and it took us, I think, half an hour to actually get from the stadium to the tube station because it was stopped all the way. I eventually got back to the hotel about 7:30. I was just wiped out, and in the end, just went over the road to the pub. And I hadn't eaten anything since breakfast, so I think I had 5 pints and a packet of crisps. That was my Wembley celebration.
Sounds good. I mean, if you ever experienced a period of time like it, coming through the almost loss of belief at the end of the season with those defeats, and then the Coventry victory away, followed up by the last minute goal with Dan Ballard at home in the second leg, followed by this epic Wembley last minute victory, because you've just said drained. I mean, actually, I think it's taken it out of all of us, really, to go up and down and up and down. And it's, as Reggie put it in one of his final press conferences, and he said, this season's been tough because we haven't beaten many sides by more than one goal. And every game has been a really tough slog. And I think we spoke to you just after the new year where you said, we're starting to come out of this malaise where everyone's just seems tired and everyone's getting through it. And it's been a really long season. And to finish it with these ups and downs where there's, like I said, that loss of belief followed by these moments. I mean, have you ever known anything like it in terms of being a roller coaster like that?
I haven't, and I don't know any journalists who could say they've had a season like this with any football club, because it's been exceptional. I mean, Reggie even referred to it in the final with VAR, and Sunderland. The Sunderland way has always been to do it the hard way, if you like. But I mean, at times the season felt like a slog. I mean, you mentioned going back to Christmas, New Year, and the first half of the season had just seemed interminable in terms of length. And I think the part of that was, and I had conversations about this at the time, because the fixture computer was not exactly kind to Sunderland, in the sense that, we get a lot of 3-game weeks in the Championship, and every 3-game week that Sunderland were playing, they were getting 2 away games, which I thought, surely someone needs to take a look at that, because we shouldn't keep on getting a repeat of, Saturday, Tuesday away, home game, then another 2 away games. And this isn't just, short trips to, Yorkshire and wherever. These were long trips to the South Coast, to South Wales, to East Anglia or wherever. It was, they were long journeys. And I think they were physically tiring. I think, it felt always like you get home, get out of the car, put your bag down, pick it back up, and go back off again down the country. And as when the clocks change and it's dark and it's midway, it's long and it's hard. And so it did feel when they reached, the turn of the year, that it already felt like that, a long season. And then it was quite telling, I thought, at Coventry. I know that was getting on towards the end of the season, but losing 3-0, and Reggie Lebris made no excuse. He just said they were knackered.
Yeah.
I mean, I think he may even have used that word. He either used knackered or exhausted.
Exhausted, he said exhausted. Yeah.
Because, it had taken its toll on, and that's where, this is where it highlights just how much this young team has achieved. The team of an average age, 24.3 years. This is where, though, the length of the Championship season potentially can take its toll, and where I think you've got to give due credit to players like Chris Mepham, who Alan Brown, those experienced players who, while they've had to confront in their own career this season being dropped, like Chris Mepham twice for not playing badly, but yet has maintained this amazing character in the dressing room and kept everybody's spirits up. And, there's no substitute for that sort of experience. And the blend this season has been perfect in that respect, because I think players like Mepham and Alan Brown, they are due as much commendation for what this team, this squad's achieved as anybody else, because they may have had limited parts to play, but the parts that they have played have been absolutely critical.
Yeah. I actually think our average age went down in the first minute when Luke O'Nien came off and Chris Mepham came on. But just taking all that into account, thinking about the season we've had, going through everything together as a young group of young lads, basically, and they've had this experience together. And I might be clutching at straws here, I might be wishful thinking, but do you think that might go somewhere to maybe at least putting a few thoughts in some of their heads who are maybe on the radars of bigger clubs, where they think, actually, yes, okay, that is great, that's a great opportunity, but I'm part of something really special here, that it's a group of lads who we've been through a lot together, and actually they want to carry it on.
I would like to think so. I would hope that could be the case. I mean, when Trey Hume came over to me at the end of the game, he said, I can't remember his exact comments, but it was almost saying, we're not finished yet. We've still got work to do. And I think, he epitomizes that drive within this group of players to keep going and prove something in the Premier League. Now, one hopes that is possibly the case. It's a difficult one, because I think ultimately that, in a week or two's time, and when the dust settles and, the club has to start being realistic about how it competes in the Premier League, the players have got to be realistic about their futures and what they can earn and what their wages are likely to be at Sunderland, compared to maybe some of the offers that some of them are almost certainly going to be made there's obviously a lot of discussions to be held and a lot of talking to be done and a lot of head scratching to see how they can capture the magic, keep the magic. I don't want, in a way, you don't want the genie to be taken out of the bottle at the moment. They've got something special and you want them to try and keep hold of that. But I fear that this summer that there will be changes, and will that change the dynamic? And as much as we'd love the fairy tale to continue into the Premier League, don't get me wrong, they might surprise everybody. Sunderland might spring a surprise next season. They may have looked at the way that Ipswich, Southampton and Leicester's seasons unravelled and think, right, well, that's not the way to go. We've got to approach it differently. We've got to look at different ways of approaching it. We've got to look at different dynamics in terms of players. We've got to look at a lot of different things. But my heart of hearts, I'd love the whole team to stay together and for all of them to have a stab at it. But I think pragmatically, I think I've got to be realistic and think that that's not going to be the case.
Yeah, well, we've got a whole summer to discuss this and kind of panic over potential rumours that are going around about some of them. But in terms of returning, because Sunderland being a Premier League club, you're now going to be going to Premier League stadiums, so no more cold nights in Stoke and all that sort of stuff for a while. I mean, how do things
manage a cold night at Crystal Palace or something?
Yeah, I mean, how do things change in that respect? I mean, is it kind of just does it feel a level up even for a commentator as much?
Well,
as
it's strange. When I went back to work this week, several colleagues who hadn't been at the BBC for very long, they were so, what do you think it'd be like to be a Premier League commentator? Are you looking forward to it? And I thought, well, we've done it. We've been there. We were 10 years there and before. I mean, this isn't something new to us as commentators. It's been an 8-year gap, yeah, admittedly, but this is not something we've never encountered before. And then we've got this very extraordinary. I was talking to a father with his 8-year-old at the weekend, who, of course, had never seen Sunderland in the Premier League before. His Sunderland supporting lifetime began 8 years ago in the Championship when they were relegated. So there's a generation grown up who, the Premier League was something that they didn't know about and hadn't experienced. But for the majority of fans, we've been there before. We know how tough it is. We know what to expect. There's been some big, big changes. We're going to get to see some amazing new football grounds. But I don't think any of us are under the illusion that the last 10 years we were there, it was easy, because most of those 10 years, Sunderland were, and we talk about, seasons which had dramatic finishes. We've had them with Gus Poyet and Sam Allardyce and, going back through all those years. So it's the big thing is Sunderland are back in a division where they deserve to be, because the supporters deserve to be there. Yeah. This football club has got the most phenomenal support. The city, the fans are Premier League, and that's where they deserve to be. The team over the last 8 years may not have deserved to have been there, having dropped out of the Premier League and those few years as they rebuilt. But the city and the fans deserve to be there, and this is their opportunity. And now you've got to hope that the custodians of the football club appreciate that and do the right thing.
Yeah. And, as I said, coming towards the end of this fantastic season, everyone's going to be looking for potential keepsakes and potential kind of things to look back on this season for. And obviously you do your commentary notes. So after a season finishes, what's the timelines between you kind of finishing your notes off and, dotting the I's and crossing the T's on those?
Well, as we speak, they're being couriered to the sportscommentators.com, who are going to produce a copy of the matchbook of the Championship. I'm also hoping to produce some myself to raise money for the Heaven branch of the Sunderland supporters, Heaven branch. We did this with Wickham and raised money, several £100 towards the Heaven branch, selling copies of that, which I signed for with that aim in mind. So those are the immediate sort of intentions over the next few weeks and months. Before we know it, we'll be pre-season and back to work, and I've got to order a new matchbook.
Well, I was going to say, you're on a well-earned summer holiday now.
I'm in work this week. I'm off to see my dad in Devon next week. I think he's still trying to make head and tails of Sunderland being in the Premier League. He's never quite got a grip of what Sunderland's done all season. There was a long conversation with him trying to explain. So there'll be a few of those next week. Then I'm getting my long-awaited honeymoon with Joanne, which we weren't able to get in September when we were married at the Stadium of Light. So we're actually going to go to the Black Cats of Italy for a weekend, and then off to Vienna and Romania. So that's something to look forward to, and all the better now for what happened last weekend.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, it does. It changes everyone's summer, doesn't it? It just lifts. I still find it incredible how much, I should be used to it by now, but it just changed the mood of a whole city, doesn't it?
Unquestionably. I mean, it's just everybody's buzzing everywhere you go. Yeah, the old chant. People are. What's the one conversation? What's the one topic of conversation? Out with the dogs. People who don't normally stop and talk football, stopping to talk football. People who don't normally listen to necessarily the football on the radio, listened on the radio. Listen, it's transformative, absolutely transformative. It puts the city on the map. It gets people talking for all the right reasons. And what a time to reach the Premier League again with the bridge about to open, the rejuvenation of the city. What a time for that to be highlighted. What a time for that to go national, if you like, international, and people realise, what is happening to this city and what's happening with this football club.
Yeah. Brilliant. Well, that's a brilliant way to end it, Nick. So thank you not just for today, but thank you for the whole season. Thanks for all your help. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Well, we couldn't do it without the fans. I mean, that's the bottom line. The fans listen. Without you, we wouldn't be here. That's the bottom line. And on top of that, thank you to this football team for what they have done and have achieved this season, which has been phenomenal.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, we'll wait for you to come back, Nick, and then we'll get back onto you for about going through all the transfers, and we'll start it all again.
Can't wait.
Brilliant. Cheers, Nick. And thanks again for everyone for listening. Of course, we're going to carry on all this reaction to what happened at Wembley and soak it all up. And of course, we'll have daily releases on How We're the podcast for maybe news roundups, and we'll see what happens over the next week because, of course, the rumours have already started. But from us, bye for now.
This podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.